Hello, I'm very glad to be here also, and now I'm waiting for my slides. While I do, I can go ahead and talk just a little bit about what RedLink does, because we are still a fairly young startup, so I'm not going to assume everyone knows. So we help academic publishers and libraries see what they're missing, as it says right there. Our goal really, and I was thought about this a lot yesterday during some of the presentations, is to solve challenges that are faced by both publishers and libraries and researchers as well, making content easier for readers to access and making analytics easier to use to give a better picture of how electronic resources are being used by our end users. So hopefully making it easier for stakeholders to have evidence-based discussions based on the data so that perhaps they're more productive conversations. So that's what we hope for. Is this going to work? Did I do something? Oh, I'm facing the wrong way. There we go. There we go. Okay, so just briefly, this is our product suite, and I'm mentioning it because it is relevant to what I'll be talking to today. Specifically, our dashboard products are what's relevant for today's discussion. For publishers, libraries, and consortia, the RedLink dashboards make it easy to access, analyze, and visualize the usage data. So again, bringing this in context to what we have discussed in the previous presentations, we see usage as a really important metric as it helps us understand not just what the researchers are reading and citing, but also gives us a wider view. Perhaps what are students reading in their studies, what are practitioners using when they're addressing some of those pressing challenges that Annie Callahan reminded us of yesterday. So it's the data that we are able to collect through the dashboard products, anonymized and aggregated over the past year, that I will be speaking to today. Some of you may have seen the announcement yesterday that our 2018 RedLink Index is now available. This covers data from the year 2017, and this is the second year that we've been able to compile this report based on that dashboard data. So similar to what Anne said, our goal is to present the data clearly, but not to draw those conclusions. We leave that up to the folks that are reading the data. So just to talk a little bit about scope and what's included in the report, our universe includes over 1,700 journals used by more than 7,500 institutions. Just to do some definitions before I get too much into the data, so when we say 218 million full text views, that includes HTML and PDF. 35 million denials, or some people say turnaways. So we're talking here about attempts to access content, whether successful or unsuccessful. And we'll be looking across all geographic regions and the types of publishers that were mentioned earlier: commercial, nonprofit, university, small and large. So going into the report, we will look at how research relates to funding and authorship, usage by publication date, region, and then looking at some consortia data. So starting with usage, funding, and authorship, I think this is a really interesting slide in that it really shows, obviously, how North America continues to drive usage and also highlights an indirect relationship between usage and funding and authorship. As was pointed out in previous presentations, we see authorship really high in Asia and funding as well. So there's an indirect relationship there, so we could think about what some of the explanations might be. Do we think about user markets, consumer markets versus producer markets? Is it a question of research, emphasis on research versus the role of practitioners, perhaps, in other areas? Looking next at archival usage, so publication date, current subscription versus back file. So if we look at the archival data, we're able to parse the metrics at 5 years or older, 10 years or older, or 20 years or older. Obviously, each one of those subsets includes the previous one. And we can see that demand remains for the archival content. One thing that's interesting, I think, is the shift to abstract views as the content ages. And again, some questions about why that might be. We know in some cases full text isn't available for older content, so that may be the simple explanation. And then if we look at content even 10 years or 20 years, we see that long tail of value, or as Annette Thomas called it yesterday, the long-term progress versus the short-term headlines. So there's definitely evidence for that as well. So layering in last year's data from last year's report, I know this is a little bit hard to get your head around the way the slide is set up, but what I would call your attention to in particular is the denials data, where we see that denials have come down significantly, particularly as the content ages. So we've seen a significant drop in denials, particularly in North America, but we see it globally. And so I think we can wonder whether this might have something to do with changes in policies around access to that older content. So just digging into that a little bit more deeply so you can see it a little bit more clearly. So I mentioned North America, so we'll look here at geographical variations as well. So this shows us full text usage, denials, abstract views, and pay-per-view by geographic region. And as I mentioned, North America really is the driver in each category. We see that usage in Oceania is higher than in either South America or Africa. And perhaps not surprisingly, Oceania also has a lower proportion of denials than either of those. Just for interest, I did do some back-of-the-envelope calculations myself to figure out denials, the percentage of denials to full text views, to figure out, are people able to access what they are hoping to access? And we do see geographic variation there as well. So our two drivers, North America and Oceania, only 10% of denials versus full text usage. On the higher end in South America, it's as high as 30%. So there's definitely geographical variation around ability to access content. And then this final category, looking at consortia. So this is comparing 2017 to 2018. So the blue and orange is 2017 data, and the gray and yellow is 2018 data. And one thing that I found really interesting is that there's been a drop in the of overall usage from 2017 to 2018 of about 5 to 6%. That is from consortia. So we're seeing, this would suggest, perhaps, that there's declining activity by consortia, but of course, it's only 2 years worth of data, so that's not a really big drop, so it's one of those things to point out that we will be keeping an eye on moving forward to see if it's really a trend. So a few last data points comparing data from the 2017 and 2018 reports, or I could say 2016 and 2017 data. This looks at the number of institutions. So on the left, we see institutions that reported increasing usage. Blue is last year's data, yellow is this year's, so it's down a little bit. So we have fewer institutions reporting increasing usage overall. Decreasing usage overall has gone up a little bit. And another third or so is pretty steady, and that hasn't changed very much. So again, these are not big variations, so we'll be keeping an eye on those to be able to see whether we have any trends. And then finally, comparing again denials as a percentage of full text usage, we do see a slight increase, although the overall number of denials has decreased. So as I close, I should mention I've only gone over the highlights of the report. If you're interested in the full set of data, we do make it available for free, so you can contact me and ask for a copy as well. We also have a library version. It's slightly different, but not particularly different. So some of the questions that we've identified along the way were the indirect relationship between usage and funding and authorship, and what some explanations might be. An explanation for the decline in denials to older content, the shift from full text views to abstract views with older content, and then finally a slight dip in the activity we see from consortia. So I hope that was useful, and I can see if there are any questions.
Thank you both very much. Are there any questions? A lot of data, and some looked, at least for me, a bit surprising, but no questions anymore. So we are done, and I'm handing over to Anu. And first, I think we all want to thank you.
Oh.
So.